What do we need to know about depth of knowledge? How can schools build inclusive cultures and improve student behavior? What are learning progressions and how can they support student learning? Welcome back to another episode of the Teachers on Fire podcast, airing live on YouTube every Saturday morning at 8 a.m. Pacific, 11 a.m. Eastern. My name is Tim Cavey, and my mission here is to warm your heart, spark your thinking, and ignite your professional practice. Today's Teacher on Fire is Jennifer Moroz. Jen is a BC educator who is proud to teach, collaborate with other educators across BC and the world, and offer professional development in assessment frameworks. She is a proud member of the new Evox Global Consulting as an Indigenous educator. You can follow Jen on X at Jennifer L. Moroz and on her website at jenmo.org. Jen, thank you so much for coming on the show today. Are you ready to light it up?
I'm ready, Tim. Thank you for inviting me.
What a pleasure. You are one of these BC educators, these BC stars, I might add, that I've had connections with for some time. And now we're finally talking in real time. That is a real treat for me. So thank you so much for joining me. Bright and early, by the way, here on the West Coast at 8 a.m. So thank you so much for starting out your Saturday here with me nice and early. Not so early for our friends in the Eastern time zone. Jen, before we get into your work and mission, let's talk about a low moment or a story of adversity that you faced somewhere in your teaching or professional journey. Tell us about it and describe how you overcame it.
Yeah, that actually fits in really nicely with my mission. Essentially, is the short story. I don't come out looking good in this story. Pre-portfolios. So I've always worked with portfolios, for the last 15 years or so. Pre-portfolios, the sheer horror for me of reporting, the reporting cycle. 2 weeks before report cards, 2 weeks after report cards, the low and the stress and all of those things were untenable in my career. I just felt that I wasn't preparing myself properly for communication of student learning in any way. And I just got used to doing those cycles of hard labor 2 weeks before report cards were due, and then developing sort of an amnesia after, and then not changing my practice at all to try and mitigate that for the next reporting cycle. So I think around 2004, I just consciously aligned my efforts and thought I have to change my practice so that I enjoy this profession and all of the things that go with it, including reporting. So the low moment really inspired me to consciously alter my practice.
I love that word untenable. And I think a lot of teachers resonate with that experience, Jen, when you say it's untenable. This is not sustainable. What I'm finding myself in, this experience is miserable, and I'm hating my life choices when I'm right in this, and then developing that amnesia after the fact and sort of doing it to ourselves all over again. So what a personal journey. And that is so meaningful to you, and I know to so many others. You're already giving them some hope, Jen, by sharing that story. I want to say hello to our friend Eric Francis on YouTube. Looking forward to listening and learning. Good to have you here this morning, Eric. Jen, let's talk about your Cree-Metis ancestry. So wonderful and so unique. What does it mean to you to bring those values and that history into your learning community and your teaching practice?
Like many educators, I feel that theater, drama is underused and is such an amazing tool for teaching and learning. And so because I'm a theater fan, I actually was able to use my interest in my background in learning about my heritage and bring that into the classroom. So, historical theater is something that I've used for years. I taught an intermediate probably for 15 years, and every year we would have some sort of dramatic reenactment of scenes through Canadian history. And so talk about, multiple objectives in social studies and science and music and art through reenacting Canadian history. And it's a great way to learn and also a wonderful way to pull people together, parents, grandparents, Aunties, uncles from all over would come to watch these theater productions and ask questions and learn about our Canadian history. And it's a wonderful vehicle because it's invitational and very inclusive. So that's what it means to me to be able to explore that and have that freedom as a teacher. And I'm so grateful for that.
That's one of the strengths of Indigenous ways of knowing and learning is the power of story and passing story on orally and through drama, as you mentioned. That is really special, and your learning community is privileged, I'm sure, to be the beneficiaries of those experiences. Jen, something else that you talk about a lot in your practice is this idea of learning progressions. So let's start right at the basics. What are learning progressions and how can they clarify the journey for teachers and students?
Well, okay. So I'm trying to think of the simplest way to put it first, but I do need to say this, and I think this is absolutely crucial and important. I have wonderful mentors in my life. Tom Guskey is one of them. And any ideas that I present, that I've ever presented, I try to present in the most easily understood format possible and based on verifiable evidence. And they're outlined in books so I need to credit this first, absolutely, before jumping in Implementing Mastery Learning by Tom Guskey and Depth of Knowledge by Eric Francis. And I think that's important to first credit that anything that I'm presenting is based on that work. So there's different interpretations of learning progressions. They're not a new idea. However, my interpretation, I think, would most closely align to best practice informative assessment and instructional alignment. Those are the two things that I think educators that I know from speaking with educators as a coach and as a friend and a peer struggle with the most. So it's a tool. We can use the tool for organizing learning units. And it has to, and I think it does, nicely reflect the 3 steps that are outlined in many books already, which is first, clearly defining the learning goal or standard by dissecting and analyzing it, which I love to do. In other words, what would a proficient learner be able to do? What is the content we want them to learn, and what are the skills they should develop in relation to that content? So that is the piece first we start at. So that's the front end loading. That's the planning. What are we looking for proficient? That goes at the top of my learning progression as sort of it would represent the ceiling of the standard. Then what we have to do is determine the components of each goal or standard that the student must learn. And those components can be sequenced. We can organize or arrange them into a meaningful sequence of steps. And I don't use the term ladder, I use progression. It's not a ladder you climb. It could be horizontal, it could be vertical, it could be sideways, it could be circles, doesn't matter. The point is we need components and they should be arranged into a meaningful sequence. And again, the sequence is a bit arbitrary, and that's where your teacher knowledge and understanding of your students comes in. As a framework, what I like about it, and this is something I share often, is I use it as a skills index. If I'm thinking of the long-term goal that I would measure with a rubric, that's great. And that's where my portfolio started. I just used summative assessment rubrics, performance standards as my long-term goal, and just trusted myself to get the kids there and compile evidence on the way. But here's the problem. If we don't delineate those steps, it's really hard to share that with students. It's really hard to be overt with parents as well in terms of where in the short-term goals, or what are those sort of check stops along the way, where are we needing support? Where are we falling down? Where are we needing that extra support to get to the long-term goals? So the delineation of that sequence is really important, not just for my instruction, but for students in front of me to know where they are in relation to a goal. The other thing that came out of the research I read and just in discussion with teachers when I'm sharing this tool is that there's some misunderstanding actually of the difference between a learning activity and a learning intention. And what I do with learning progressions is we use the learning intention language. I use the DOK tool for that, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but we scaffold and structure it in a sequence. The learning activities that support that is actually in a column next to the learning intention, and the evidence that would be collected in relation to that goal. So that helps us distinguish between a learning intention and an activity. And I'll tell you why this is important, though. This is really important. And I'll stay on this for just a second, because we have lots of stuff out there. This is the feedback I'm getting. This is not what I'm making up. Teachers are telling me we got lots of stuff. We need a way to know, is the stuff I'm seeing on Teachers Pay Teachers, all those textbooks that we have in the book room, how do I align that to is it aligned to the learning standard, first of all? How do I do that? And in what sequence should I do that? And how do I know that learners understand? How do I make sure my assessment tasks are aligned to the ceiling of the standard? That's a big one. Lots of stuff, but we need, if we're not aligning them purposefully, we're hamstringing our efforts when we report. And I touched on that I think we hamstring ourselves by not planning carefully. Then we get that 2 weeks of misery when it comes sheer misery.
Yes. Yeah. A couple of that was wonderful. That was incredible. And I love the clarity that you use to sort of lay that out, because I think it gives that powerful common language for teachers and learners to know exactly where we are situated, because that first important question is, where are we in the learning?
Yeah.
And then the next important question is, where are we going? And then what are the steps we need to take to get there? I think here in British Columbia, we use a proficiency scale through K to 9, and it includes emerging, developing, proficient, and extending.
Right.
And I think one thing that teachers will quickly, maybe a jump that they would make after listening to you, and this might be a false jump or an inaccurate jump, is that part of your goal with the learning progression is to describe each of those proficiency levels, but it's not that neat and tidy, right?
No. Actually, the best way it was explained to me, and this is absolutely crucial. So whenever I start with a presentation, I always say there's a difference between that's why I said summative and formative steps on the way. They're different. So a learning progression changes in cognitive complexity as we move through the steps. The summative assessment is gradations of quality of the same cognitive depth, which means that, and the absolute best analogy is ingredients of a meal that we're stacking. Then we judge the meal in gradations of quality, and that's the standard. So we're unpacking the components of the standard and checking for understanding along the way Tom Guskey might describe in mastery learning as feedback and correctives. That cycle that we go through, where we're reteaching and ensuring mastery and understanding of those components. How do we use the BC Proficiency Scale? It's no different than anything else. The only difference is, instead of using that as a summative measure at the end of a unit, which we often do, we now have our short-term goals set out, and we can describe those, particularly if they are standard aligned with emerging, developing, proficient, and extending. And that's how I use Eric Francis' work to make sure that the learning intentions are aligned to the standard, at the ceiling of the standard, the cognitive depth of the standard, and that's when you can use gradations of quality. When they're not, when they're at a DOK 1, for example, you can use consistency language, like never, sometimes, rarely, usually, often,
right?
Where it's more binary. And I think this is an important distinction, because that's where things get muddy often. So if you're seeing it as a plan and check stops, you're using it formatively. And that's very, very important to inform your instruction as you go.
And one more clarification, when you say learning intention, we're talking learning. I often use the term learning target. We're talking about the same thing, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And like Tom Guskey says, what difference does it make? Like really, really,
It doesn't.
it's the goal. Let's just say goal.
It's
Yeah.
the goal. Yeah.
Yeah.
Connected to a curricular standard, or
Yes.
here in BC, we would say curricular competency.
Sure.
But that was laid out so well, Jen, because we talked off air about using visuals or screen sharing, and you did that all off the top. That was outstanding. That was incredible.
I'm sorry. I didn't want to.
No.
I didn't want to have to share my screen. You know what?
No.
I do it all the time, and I'm so grateful to you, Tim, that you're willing to do this conversationally. It's such a blessing. Blessings. Thank you.
Well, it's great, Jen, because the podcast listeners, the audio only listeners, don't have the benefit of the visuals. So we're making do for them. And we've got you, podcast listeners. Thank you so much for joining us. Jen, you mentioned depth of knowledge and Eric Francis. Let's go there next. So what is it that you think teachers miss when it comes to the depth of knowledge conversation?
Oh gosh. Okay. Well, I missed it big time. Went right over my head. I had no idea until a mentor friend of mine said, "Look, I've got this buddy. He's an expert with depth of knowledge. Contact him and talk to him about it." And the reason why, it was a design issue. So anytime I have a design issue with something, I think it's because I don't know something and I have to learn it. So essentially, I was looking at verbs. When I started, building my progressions, I was looking at the verb as definitive markers of cognitive depth. So I would just look at the verb. And the reason that I love Eric's work is because it's not just the cognitive action, it's the conditions of what exactly and how deeply. And that changes the game, because I'm telling you, we need tools to unpack our standards, our learning standards. We've got competencies, we've got content. We have to put those two things together. First of all, that's just for starters. Then I think we need a tool to make the job of specifying the degree of mental processing demanded by that standard fairly simple. When I look at the BC curriculum as it is, and when I go through this with fellow teachers. So I might add that people will contact me and just say, "Hey, do you mind helping me develop a progression for Algebra 7? And absolutely, yes. That's what I do. So when we look at the curriculum, we see competencies and content and a smattering of suggestions under what we call the elaborations. It's just a kind of a smattering of some skills, sprinkle a few skills, or some suggestions for activities. That's not specific enough to inform my instruction. I need specificity in my instruction. I really need that, especially if I'm aligning things. So how can I use that tool, the DOK tool, to strategically sequence those learning intentions? And the curriculum is broad, to say the least. We know that. So what Eric's tool does, by the way, I've recommended this book a million times to so many people, and teachers buy it because it's content neutral in that you can use it with any curriculum. The BC curriculum is just a curriculum, and it's got language, and we need tools to understand the language. And that's what this does. He talks about depth of knowledge 1, 2, 3, or 4 in terms of the cognitive demand, and this is important, of the task, the skill, or the response that we're asking from students. So when you can use this tool, and what I love about Eric's work too, love it, is there are multiple charts and sort of examples of the DOK 1 through 4 in action, where you take language and you can specify that and use it strategically when you are building a learning progression to ask yourself the questions: what am I asking students to do in response? What is the response going to look like? Is it going to be, recall and reproduce? Is it going to be an application? Does it require application or analysis? And I will add this too. if this is a quick takeaway for everybody that I love, because I can remember it, it's AAA. So knowledge acquisition is a DOK 1, knowledge application is a DOK 2, and knowledge analysis is a DOK 3. And I know, is that cool? So there's 3 A's. And another little cool thing is that all of our standards are a DOK 2 or 3 ceiling. In other words, they're requiring that level of understanding. So that gives us a strategic advantage using this tool for our instruction.
So good. And I love the focus on the verbs, those important verbs. They're so juicy and they tell us so much, right? Because there's such a difference between recall and analyze. And I see Eric here in the audience. I want to bring in a couple of comments from him. He says, Jennifer has created a great resource that will help teachers tier their instruction and interventions so they can rise to reach and go beyond the standards. Absolutely. Thank you for unpacking just a bit of that there, Jen. And he also says, I'm very grateful for how Jen has applied my ideas and strategies about DOK. So BC educators, we've got a local expert here. Jen Moroz is at your service. Thank you so much, Jen. And you're right, with our BC curriculum, I love it. I love it in so many ways, but it is intentionally non-prescriptive. So it does put some of the work, would you not agree? And that's what I heard you describe on us as educators. It's trusting us, right? With the leadership and the professionalism. But
and you know what? Yeah, that's all well and good. No, it's all well and good. That's the thing is I'm telling you though, we need tools. That's what I'm hearing from teachers. Yeah. Tools are important. And because I'm not the expert, but I know people who are. And so that kind of leads into what my mission is. You know, my mission is I'm not an expert, but when I take experts' work and I can try my best to represent it in a tangible and concrete way and share that with educators, if it's helpful and it makes somebody else's life better than mine was back in 2004 when I thought, I can't continue. I don't even like myself around report card time. How are kids viewing me? You know, so if I can help with that, that's what I want to do.
All right. Well, once again, depth of knowledge from Eric Francis. Check out that resource. And Jen, just before I move on, I don't want to miss that little tidbit that Eric shared. Where can we go to get your framework and the work that you've developed? Is the website the best spot to find those resources?
This is a great question, actually. And thanks so much, Tim. I love that question. That's great. Because I'm really bad at this. I usually don't give people practical ways of finding my work. I just talk about it. So thank you. I would recommend this because I've taken some data in terms of when people contact me and reach out and say, hey, could we have some help? I always ask, how did you find me? And they tend to find me on YouTube. It's a little channel, no big deal. But what I do is I collaborate with educators and I get them to share their iterations and use of learning progressions and talk about the application in their classroom. And so my YouTube channel, we can link it later, but if you go to genmo.org, I've got a link right there to it. And I've got free, in every video that I put out, if it's a little short, there's always a free Google link to a sample learning progression. Teachers can look at it. And that's what they're doing. They're having a look and going, oh, I'm going to adapt this to my classroom, my situation, which is ACEs. So it's the Assessment Syndicate.
All right.
At Assessment Syndicate, YouTube. It's just a little channel, but I'd really appreciate, you having a look there.
Well, these questions are just flowing one after the other because that's where I wanted to go next, actually, is talk about the Assessment Syndicate. You mentioned your small YouTube channel, but as you know, I'm a big fan of YouTube. I think it's only going to become a bigger resource for teachers and educators across BC and around the world. So I love that you're doing that. I love that you're posting content there. And it's so easy to share, right? Everyone knows YouTube. So take a look for Jen's work at the Assessment Syndicate. So let's talk about this mysterious group. Tell us about your mission and your current work. What kinds of resources do you offer?
Yeah. Well, okay. So the Syndicate. Yeah, it sounds like in the shadows
I
sort
love
of
it.
thing.
I love
I
it.
know. Well, you know what? I have to make things fun for myself. My goodness.
Yes,
It's
yeah.
a hard, I'm telling you, assessment's a hard sell. It's not a
It
sexy
is.
topic. So
It's
if
true.
I'm just trying to add a little bit of fun.
Yeah.
So essentially, again, I'm not the expert, but there are a lot of people who are. And so what I like to do is take their work and apply it practically, which all educators do anyway. And so the syndicate and what I'm trying to do is bring people together in fellowship, essentially. Hey, I tried this. This is how it worked for me. This is what it looked like in my classroom. On my YouTube channel, and I mean, there's a Facebook page too called the Assessment Syndicate. Um, they feature themselves, but they're educators who have such a vast capacity and knowledge in so many areas that I do not. I do not have that knowledge. And it's sort of like, it's akin to being a director um, of a musical. I'm backstage. I don't sing, I don't act, I don't dance, I don't do any of those things. I'm terrible. But I know people who can. And so, what you are doing essentially is bringing people together who are stars and who are so capable and asking them to demonstrate application of researched or evidence based um, assessment practice. And that's what I want for the Assessment Syndicate. I want practical, quick application that you're not having to dig for, go and find on your own. And you don't have to just depend on rubrics made on Teachers Pay Teachers, because often the rubrics are not gradations of quality. They have numbers attached to them. And I think it's really important to go back to the experts, to evidence-based instruction, because I'll just kind of go just to the side for just a minute. This is something I believe. We are currently in our province really talking about what's best practice in reading, the science of reading, for example. What's best practice in math, teaching mathematics? And so why aren't our grading and assessment practices held to the same lens, critical lens? And so all I can do and this is from my heart, is just say, every teacher coming into the profession, this is my wish, that you have access to the experts, and that we actually offer instruction and training and capacity for teachers in the profession to be able to effectively implement research based assessment practice. It's an important thing.
It is. It is. I said to Jen off air just before we went live together that I really am inspired by your courage, Jen, to go after the biggest names in assessment. So keep on doing that work. I'm going to follow your lead and go after the biggest speakers and authors, because why not? We want to share their expertise and their knowledge, as you just said. Thank you for joining us, Teachers on Fire. If you're getting value here from this conversation, give this video a like wherever you are tuning in. Let's shift gears a little bit, Jen, and talk about school cultures and student behavior, which I know are issues close to your heart. Just preparing for this conversation and going through your feeds, I could see that those themes appearing a few times. So what is one move that you'd like more schools to make in these areas right now when you think about May of 2024?
Oh, okay. So what are the conversations that we hear, the water cooler conversations or the coffee conversations? They center around usually two things, and they're the same things that I hear when I'm on Zoom with groups of teachers. Two things: assessment, the curriculum, how to implement it properly, how to align all of our assessment and tasks or summative assessment to the ceiling of the standard, how to make sure there's alignment, and adventures in misalignment. So that's also a topic. But another big one is behavior and school culture. So those are the two. And again, I'm not an expert, so at all. And I'm always looking and watching and seeing, what I think might be an answer. And I really would like to mention the work of Tom Bennett. I bought the book a few weeks ago. It's called Running the Room, A Teacher's Guide to Behavior. He's out of the UK. From what I understand, a former bouncer. And it's
That
so
is great.
cool. He's the coolest, and he's so funny. And also, I might add, highly recommended by Dylan William, which is no
Mm,
small thing.
yeah.
That was in one of his not the forward, but the sort of early pages, and I thought, holy. But he actually is speaking not from opinion, but from research. And
Mm.
what he recommends is a behavior curriculum.
Hmm.
So I know. And I think that we've gotten away from that. We're heavily opinionated, and we have opinions and we have reactions. And I understand that because it's an emotional topic, really, because it affects us emotionally. But I think that he posits in his book that we need a behavior curriculum and to
Hmm.
adopt that. And he goes through principles of human behavior. And his big question, which I'm fascinated by, and I really hope your listeners, if they pick up, I want them to pick up 3 books. I want them to Implementing Mastery Learning, Depth of Knowledge, Eric Francis, Tom Guskey, and Running the Room, Tom Bennett, because he asks the very interesting questions. Why would students behave at school? Why would they? What are the reasons they might? And there's very few. So he's actually approaching it from an interesting lens, and he's talking about finding ways and practical things that we can do in the school to make it easier to behave than it is to misbehave. And the one that really stood out to me, and this I think is something we all can do, is that you have to, as a teacher, explicitly teach behavior, what good behavior looks like in terms of focus and punctuality and all of those things that we value, but you have to embody it. And that was interesting because often when we're tired, we think, oh, I wish they just do their job and behave. But how are we feeling, and how is that affecting the sort of the vibe in the classroom? Are we punctual? I try to be. Are we able to focus? Are we able to embody these things and teach them overtly? Because kids come from a variety of backgrounds, that some come to our school not knowing how to behave. They don't know how.
Mhm.
So punishing it, he just said, does not change anything. We have to teach it and also have sanctions in place for when misbehavior happens that are consistent. And that was the other thing. So I recommend buying the book. Again, I'm not an expert, but I would be very interested in starting a reading club for that and digging into that book. And actually, this is my challenge to you, Tim. Invite him for an interview.
Oh,
Him or
yes,
Tom
let's do it.
Guskey. I'm being
Oh
serious.
boy. Oh boy.
Do it. Do
Well,
it.
challenge has been laid. Thank you, Jen. And that book again was called Running the Room by Tom Bennett.
Yeah.
A couple of things. One that I keep hearing about, Jen, is phones. And so I'm actually not going to open the phone conversation, but I think phones for teachers are they're a major issue. They're a major issue. So we need to do work in that space. And then the other thing that I resonated with too is the idea of building the practical norms. So here in BC, we have the core competencies that students are exposed to all through K to 12, which include personal and social responsibility and some great profiles that go along with those. But I do wonder, just listening to you speak about this, I do wonder if we need to do more work in the space of building out the practical norms. Like what does personal and social responsibility look like in all of these different settings?
And I know.
Yeah.
I agree, Tim. Totally. And actually, I'm so glad you said that, because I forgot that part of what he says is exactly what you just said, is that we teach it as if it's a curriculum, like we teach any other academic curriculum, and we offer feedback and suggestions for improvement. We let kids know how they're doing. It's not a tell me how you think you're doing, a self-reflection. No, I'm actually your teacher, so I'm going to be guiding you along the way that we embed formative assessment, correctives, all of those things in an academic capacity. So that's so cool. You are correct. And that's why I think you're perfect to interview him.
Oh, well, thank you for that. That's kind words. But yeah, I like what you're saying there, because what I hear, I hope correctly, is, hey, teachers, you should be a mentor human being. you're an adult. You have the maybe take a little bit more courage, a little bit more boldness to tell a student, hey, you are still developing your skills of social responsibility. I'd like to help you take this next step of growth here in whatever setting it happens to be. So I love the PBIS or parts of the PBIS philosophy. I'm not big into the extrinsic rewards and the systems of payment. I'm not big into that at all, but I do like the establishing of positive norms in different spaces.
I agree. And that's what he talks about.
Oh, does he? Okay.
You didn't read the book?
I have not read the book. No.
Okay. Well, it sounds like you did. So.
All right. Well, I will add it to my list. I am a bit of a Kindle addict, Jen. So I don't know. I don't know what they come onto my Kindle faster than I can read them. So I end up reading about 30 books at a time. But
awesome.
Anyway. Jen, let's shift gears here. From your feed, I think I know how you might answer this one, but I'm curious. And for the educators listening outside of education, what's another area of learning for you? What is it that ignites your passions outside of the classroom and really brings you alive, lights you on fire as a human being?
Okay. It closely aligns to when I had to alter my assessment practice, making it a little bit every day rather than leaving it for 2 weeks before report card time. Same thing. It's fitness and it's an everyday thing. It's 10,000 steps a day. How many chin-ups can I do? If I can only do 2, oh, well, you know what? I'm going to make it for 10 by this date. And I really think that fitness, for me anyway, that's how I get my endorphins. That's my endorphin go-to. And I think it's true for a lot of people. And I think keeping ourselves physically well and fit is really important in this job.
Mm-hmm. And in practical terms, could you tell us how you do that? Do you hit the gym before school each day? Do you have a home gym? Or is it mostly just running and walking? What does that look like?
Yeah. No, I have a chin-up bar downstairs. So I do a few of those before I leave the house. I might add that my kids are finally either driving themselves to school or gone and working. So I actually have a bit more time now. But yeah, I morning I'm doing chin-ups, and in the afternoon when I come home, I don't want to. I'm going to admit this. I have to force myself to go up the trail. I actually live just right over by UNBC. I go up the trail and I brave whether or not I'm going to run into a bear or not. So it's also an added advantage of raising your heart rate. I've had that happen a couple of times.
Oh, really? Okay.
It's great training, I'm telling you. Yeah. So that's how I do it. And I force, I know it sounds terrible, but it's okay, because that's something that we have to do. When you want to make changes, you tell yourself you're going to do it, period. And you do it.
Mm-hmm. And you even say it publicly sometimes, because that adds that extra layer of accountability. Well, that's really inspiring, Jen. And I think the consistency is so important, because just getting out there once in a while or 1 or 2 days a week is probably not enough to really create that sustainable change in your clarity and strength and stamina that we're looking for. So thank you for modeling that so well. And yes, from my tree planting days in the Prince George area, I can say lots of bears. So that's no joke. They are frequent visitors in that area. Hey, teachers, if you're enjoying this conversation as we start to land the plane, consider adding the Teachers on Fire YouTube channel to your morning commute. Start your day on fire. Jen, share about one personal habit or productivity hack that contributes to your success and keeps your fire burning. Is there another daily habit that helps keep you productive?
Yes. And actually it links to what you were saying about Kindle. Some books I need to have as physical items, but I've actually just started reading, and, to the point that when I sit in bed at night, sort of lights out, I'm reading now a lot more, because I want to make sure I can implement that intelligently in my practice. It's very important to me. So that, to me, at night, I'll read for about half an hour and make sure it's something that it's written by an expert, essentially, not opinion. I go with the experts. I like nonfiction anyway. I don't read stories.
Yeah.
That's just me.
Well, it's not just you, it's me too. Almost exactly the same. And I would second that and say to any teacher, if sometimes you hear, who's got time for reading? But I would say, wow, if you can just, I know this is hard. I know it's hard, but if you can put the phone aside and pick up the Kindle at bedtime, you'd be surprised just that those 15, 20 minutes, whatever it is per day, that adds up, doesn't it? And you find yourself getting through books. Tell us about someone that we need to follow on Education X, Instagram, or LinkedIn, and share why they've been inspiring you lately.
Yeah. Tom Guskey. Please do. Yes, he actually, I was so intimidated. I was telling you, I was so afraid to interview him, but he is, as an expert, a master teacher. He's also very soft-spoken, very kind and helpful. And that to me is very inspiring. It actually inspires me to act the same way with my fellow teachers. And I recommend talking to him. I really do. And asking him big questions about assessment, because he knows his stuff.
Point us to an edtech tool that you currently love using somewhere in your professional practice.
Right. Well, this is something I picked up from you, actually, Tim. I was watching something that you were doing and you mentioned Canva, and I thought, my tech skills are shockingly low. So I thought, okay, I'm going to give it a try. So I went to Canva, and I'm loving that for video editing, and for kind of all of my social media needs. I love it. And I don't do a ton. I'm not good with social media, quote unquote, but if I am editing a video, it works great. I love Canva. It's very user-friendly.
And I love that you said that about the video, Jen, because I'll say this to any teachers listening, thinking about video editing projects in your middle years or high school years. I've seen for years and years, I've seen video editing happening by students on iPads. But the thing I don't like about iPads is that it isolates the editor, and you've got 3 kids watching while one is doing the editing. And so on Canva, you can do that real-time collaboration. And it's so much more fun, and every student is engaged. And so that's what I've tried just for this first year, and it's going so well. So I want to put that out there that, again, if you're trying video projects in your classroom, think about using Canva, which is free to all educators and schools. Yeah.
Awesome.
Jen, this feels like a foolish question because you've been so good already with the book titles and you've got them there on hand. What's one book that you've read lately, or one of your all-time faves that you would recommend for us?
Yeah, depth of knowledge I've shared so many times and yip-yapped about it so much, but I mean, that's just an old standby and whatnot. But honestly, Implementing Mastery Learning, 3rd edition, Tom Guskey, please read it. And the other thing that I might just quickly add that shocked me about this was, again, he's an expert in so many ways and intimidating in how much he knows and what he's able to do. But the way he writes is inviting, and it's almost got warmth to it. Like it's like talking to a really good friend or mentor who's trying to help you be a better educator. Or, I'm serious. I have never had that experience with reading a manual. It's like a technical manual, yet it's written in a conversational, sort of warm, helpful way. Honestly, I don't know how he managed that, but he did. And so I highly recommend that book for all educators. It's for everyone. The principles are evidence-based, and they're, a lot of what we're seeing sort of permeate our lexicon. All of these terms that we're seeing as educators, none of them are new. They sort of are the progenitor, really, is Benjamin Bloom. And that's something you learn through this book, where everything came from, where it all started. And it's just the most important read that I've had or had the pleasure of engaging in anyway.
That's a big endorsement. Again, Tom Guskey. And isn't it special when these people that we respect so much in terms of their knowledge and expertise also turn out to be the most amazing human beings as well, and just model people that we want to emulate. As a support to my work, who is one educator? Now, you've done some great name dropping here, but is there someone maybe in BC or elsewhere that you would say, Tim, you need to have them on the Teachers on Fire podcast?
I would, that's such a good question. As a teacher, like an educator, fellow educator, who actually is really excellent, who I've also interviewed, is Kelsey McDonald. She's out of Prince George, and she's really an excellent educator, and has come up with really amazing ways of engaging her students in Indigenous ways of knowing and learning. And I would recommend Kelsey McDonald. She's here on I believe on Twitter, and I'll give you her information for sure. So that would be definitely one that I would recommend.
Sounds good. Kelsey, I'll be in touch. And just for fun, Jen, as we wrap this up, what are you streaming during your downtime when you've got no brain power left for anything productive?
You know what? I know. And this is going to make me look even more of a nerd than I already have displayed today on if it's possible to be more of a nerd. It is. So my absolute favorite show is Ancient Aliens. I love learning about, just how civilizations have risen and fallen for years before us. And we're basically a civilization living with amnesia. We don't remember a lot, and there's ancient wisdom. And so accessing that is really interesting. I love it. It kind of touches off that archaeology interest that I have, and sort of mystery and theatrical sort of flavor. And honestly, another thing that I recommend, if you need to completely tune out and get some comfort, I watch reruns, the old Scooby-Doo. Okay. I know it's so no, really though, those were good shows. Yes. The 70s Scooby-Doo. I put that on while I read books like this, so that I kind of have that balance of, cool things in the background, and then I can do my thinking a little bit easier. So,
what a combo!
I know. I'm weird.
I love it. Well, Jen, this has been fantastic. For Teachers on Fire interested in your message, what are the best ways for them to connect and find you online?
I honestly, if you go to genmo.org, that's the easiest, genmo.org. That's super simple. From there, it's sort of a platform where you can take a look at some free offerings, lots there, by the way. And visit my YouTube channel. That's the best way to see what I can offer. And I think on the genmo.org site, there is a place that says connect with me, and it will automatically email me, which is how most people reach out. So.
Sounds good, Jen. Again, I want to thank you so much for sharing your time with the podcast this morning. This has been fun and inspiring. Such a pleasure to connect with another BC educator star. And I'm so proud of the work that you're doing and continue to do to support educators. Teachers on Fire, I'm your host, Tim Cavey, and I'm so grateful that you decided to spend some of your day listening to this podcast. I hope that in some way the content you heard from Jen Moroz sparked your thinking and ignited your practice. And I'll meet you next week right here on the Teachers on Fire podcast. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye. You can still go. Even when you feel slow, you can still go. Even when there's no hope, you can still go. I never answer to no, man, I still go.